Live on YouTube.
Is it popping up?
Yeah, in the upper left.
Right, great.
Live on YouTube at the top of the screen.
Let me just take a moment to welcome you guys that are watching us live on YouTube. We are in week 3 of our Daniel class. So if you guys want to join us, we'd encourage you to participate by watching live on this YouTube channel, or let me just take a moment to welcome you guys that are watching us live on YouTube. We are getting a little bit of reverb here, so let me see if I can't get rid of it. There we go. Okay, so Daniel chapter 3 is where we're going to be, and we have some friends of ours on Zoom that are here. So everybody on Zoom, go ahead and wave. They have volunteered to be our online virtual class while we have you guys watching on YouTube. And so you'll get to hear from them throughout today's master class. If you would like to join in on the Zoom, just go ahead and go to branchlife.church, hit the master class tab, and then fill in your information. We'll get your email, and I'll email you the Zoom link for the next time. But for today, this is our virtual class, and we are glad that you guys can be here. We'll let you all say hi. Cancel. Let's see. Go ahead and say hi to the world, everybody.
Hi, world.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, this is fun. All right, guys, excited. Now, if you guys can mute yourselves and unmute yourselves, that would be great, just so we don't pick up some reverb noise. But when you're ready to talk, don't forget to unmute yourselves. We did have some homework from last week. So we are, hopefully you have read all the way up through Daniel chapter 3. And then what we ask you to do is when you come to the class on Wednesday is have one question locked and loaded from anything that we've read so far. Remember, we're really fond of questions. Now, today we're going to jump into Daniel chapter 3, which is one of the more famous chapters in the Bible. This is where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego get thrown into the fiery furnace. We have quite a bit of doctrine and theology, but there's some incredible practical stuff that we're going to jump into. And today, as we get to the end of our time together, we're going to talk more specifically about application statements. So what difference does this make today for me? So how can this ancient story impact my life today? And there's some incredible things that we're going to work through. We're going to kind of go through a workshop, sort of a journey today to travel through this idea. So we'll remind you of that stuff. But to get started, is there any questions that anybody came with from their reading up through Daniel chapter 3 to this point? And if you have those, go ahead and share them. And go ahead, Jared.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, why is it that Daniel, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael are all given Babylonian names, but Daniel is the only character that is not repeatedly used as Belteshazzar?
Great. Good question. So Daniel, this actually comes back up this week. The Daniel and all of the youths that were captured from Jerusalem and taken to Babylon. Remember, the story starts with this big kind of kidnapping, prisoner of war scene. Their names got changed from their Hebrew names to Babylonian names, and they were trying to strip them of their identity and connection to their God and giving them identities that connected them to Babylonian gods. Probably the most likely reason that Daniel's name, which was Belteshazzar, is not used primarily, and his Hebrew name is used primarily, is because he is the author of the book. And so he was referring to his given name as what he would refer to himself as. So a lot of times, think of it, if you got a nickname in college and all your college friends knew you by that name, you don't usually call yourself that name. You call yourself your given name. And so Daniel would call himself by his given name. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that's how they were known by. That's what he would have called them. That's would have been the name that they used. So when he wrote it down, that's the names that he uses throughout the story. Also very interesting, one of the kings that we're going to talk about in the next couple of chapters is King Belteshazzar, has the same name as Daniel. So maybe just to avoid confusion, he stuck with his Hebrew name and just left Belteshazzar for the king that's coming up here in a couple of chapters, the chapter where the writing is literally on the wall. So good question. Good question. Any other questions? Ralph, go ahead. Ralph, and unmute yourself.
Yes, I find it odd. It's just observation that, we're looking back at chapter 2. We're looking at the explanation of the dream. Chapter 2, right? I'm not misremembering.
We're going to, chapter 2 is the dream. Today we're going to be in chapter 3.
Right. So, my mind's clear. You'll hear in a minute. But given the statue in chapter 2 and the beginning of chapter 3, I find it very interesting that even after the interpretation of that dream, what does this king do? He makes a statue of himself. I just find that very, very odd.
Yeah. So to bring everybody up to speed who's just hearing the story for the first time, King Nebuchadnezzar is a major character through these first 4 chapters. As a matter of fact, King Nebuchadnezzar may be who the first half of the book is about, even other than God. King Nebuchadnezzar is the character that goes through the most change and the most transformation. That's going to come up in a major way in chapter 4. But anyway, he sees that God's going to be the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and he acknowledges it in chapter 2. And in chapter 3, his response is, I'm going to build a giant statue of myself and make people worship it. So yeah, it's just not getting through yet what the message is. So we'll see what happens as it keeps going on, but pay attention to King Nebuchadnezzar's track or his journey. Remember, the genre of this book is a story. This is a historical narrative, true story. And when you're telling stories, you're paying attention to the characters and their arcs and the plot and kind of how they change through the story. Does Nebuchadnezzar go from being a bad guy to being a good guy? What happens through him in this story, and why do we know his name? An incredible character in this book. An incredible character in history, King Nebuchadnezzar. So again, next week, we're going to do a little bit more work on who he is. So any other questions? Cheryl, I think, had her hand up. Unmute yourself and let us know.
The obvious question to me is, where's Daniel?
Right. Exactly. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego get all the credit in this chapter, and Daniel's heart is, his name may not even be in this book. I'm not sure if it's in chapter 3 at all, but he's not there in this particular story. So what happened to him? Did he worship? Did he bow down? We just don't know. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were the ones that came to the king's attention. They were tattled on, and they were given the post that they were in because of their relationship with Daniel. Their post was different than Daniel's post. So they weren't together at this point in the story, and they're the ones that got caught not worshiping in chapter 3. So yeah, Daniel's absent from here, but remember, Daniel's the one telling the story. So somehow he is informed of everything that's happening, but he doesn't say what's happening to him at this time. Good question. Any other questions? And then we'll jump into it. All right, good stuff. What I'm going to try to do, see if this works. I'm going to share the screen really quick. Remember, we're going to go, we go through 3 steps as we study the Bible, and we want to encourage you to do these 3 steps as well. So I just want to remind you of these steps. So the first step is we look, the second step is we think, and the third step is we do. Observation, interpretation, application. So whenever you read the Bible, you're constantly traveling through these steps. Each step has an exercise for you. Look is mark it up. So make observations. And if you use your pen and pencil or a notepad or your computer screen, you can mark things, highlight things all along the way, just so you're paying attention to what's there, what words are being used, repeated. In the think stage, you're asking questions and getting answers. So who, what, where, why, when, I understand this, explain this to myself. You're using resources like study Bibles and commentaries and friends and the internet to kind of help you answer those questions. Also, you can arrive at the truth principle. what's true for everyone, everywhere, and every time. And then in the second stage, you say, okay, how does this truth matter, impact me today? And you actually give yourself some marching orders. So the Bible changes you. It doesn't just entertain you. It doesn't just inform you. It literally transforms. The Bible says by the renewing of your mind, we're transformed. So step one is the Bible island. What's there? What's it look like? Of course, they always have palm trees and little flat roof huts and sheep and shepherds. That's the Bible island. That's what's happening. So in Daniel chapter 3, it's in Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar's there. There's fiery furnaces. So that's happening there. The truth principle is what the bridge. It's true for everyone, everywhere, and every time. We're going to try to identify some of these today. And then what's the truth impact on my island, on me today? So 1, 2, 3, we're going to travel through this time. So if you have your Bibles and you're able to jump in, go ahead to Daniel chapter 3. Let me see if I can bring this up. I'm not going to be able to watch both my screen and see if this is working. It tells me it's working, so I'm going to assume it's working. Cheryl, I can see you. Can you see the Bible on the Zoom call? Give me thumbs up. Awesome. All right, so this is Daniel chapter 3. Again, we won't read the whole thing out loud, but we want to encourage you to run through that. Hopefully you've read through it. If not, that's your homework assignment to read through it before next week. But it starts with our main character of the chapter. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits, and his breadth was 6 cubits. If you have a study Bible, usually those will tell you exactly how big that is. I don't have that information in front of me, but it was huge. I think 75 feet high. So more than 7 basketball hoops high. He put it on the plain of Dora. You can actually find where that was in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar set to gather the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justice, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province. And that includes Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as the delegation of the king. And he tells them, and I'll just sum it up to jump down, that they're going to hear a proclamation. They're going to hear music played. And then everyone's going to be commanded to, verse 6, worship and fall down and worship immediately, or be cast into the fiery furnace. So this is punishable by death, the equivalent of burning at the stake in our time. Therefore, as soon as all people heard the sound of the hornpipe, lyric, and every kind of music, they all fell down and worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar set up. So we look at this and we say, all right, here's some observations, and hopefully you're circling, you're underlining, you're starting to mark it up. Main characters. We got all the people. We got all the leaders of Babylon. We got King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, when we look back at the history of this thing, remind ourselves of Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar, who this is and where this is. This is Bible times, and this is what's happening then. There's all kinds of stuff between us that's flowing between us and the Bible times. So this is in a different location. This is in a different language. This is in a different time, different culture. So there's all kinds of differences that are going on here. We just want to observe what's happening. King Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon, they were a polytheistic theology. So they believed in many gods that were everywhere. There was all kinds of gods, and everything was a god, and everything was ruled by a god. And Nebuchadnezzar himself was a god in his own eyes. And so for him to put up a statue and have people bow down to it, not weird, not unheard of. We might look at it and go weird, unheard of for us, but are there things that we culturally bow down to together whenever we hear the music? So if I would start to hum a song, let's see, maybe dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. So all of a sudden everybody would like, we know what to do when that song, we stand in respect, we take our hats off, we cover our hearts, because we react in a form of worship patriotically to our own flag. And so this was what they did in that culture, to celebrate their religion, their king, and it just so happened that it was something you had to do or you died. They believed in it richly. And we talked about the theology behind death and their fear of death on chapter 1. So because it was, this would not have been weird in their eyes, this was something that was expected. That's what comes up to us, and we think it's weird, but it's really not that weird. Also, if you all see, if they would come to our culture and say, look, these people worship that thing that happens on a field, they surround themselves in these coliseums and they watch these people tackle each other and they cheer when they get to the end of the field. They think we worship football, and we would go through that. Maybe we do. Maybe there's a lesson to be learned here. So we go to chapter 8. Therefore, at the certain time, the Chaldeans came forward, maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to the king Nebuchadnezzar, live forever. There are these Hebrew guys that are not worshiping. And so they get told on. Verse 13, King Nebuchadnezzar is furious and his rage, and he brings Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to him. So there's some, this wasn't automatic. Remember, he knows Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He is fond of them. They're impressive. They've been given gifts by God, and he's seen God through them already. So he doesn't automatically throw them. He's going to give them a second chance. Verse 16 and verse 17 and verse 18. These are the verses in this story that carry that linchpin moment. And remember, in the book itself of Daniel, and in every chapter and every section, there are these in-depth places that give us insight into what God's teaching us and what he's trying to show us. So if you're going to mark anything up in this chapter, I'm going to tell you 16, 17, and 18 are verses that you need to pay attention to, because they're really going to give you some, we're getting the story, and then we're getting some truth thrown at us right here, and then we're getting the rest of the story. So the story hangs on this truth that's going to be presented by Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So if you have anything that you can to underline, this is it, 16, 17, and 18. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king, we have no need to answer you in the matter. If this be so, that we get thrown into the fiery furnace, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship your golden image that you have set up. So we see into their thinking what and why they did what they did, what and why they were willing to give their lives, and what they were believing to be true. At least you can give them credit for believing this to be true. Whether or not it's true, that we continue on with our journey. So then King Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, did not like the answer at all. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego get thrown into the fiery furnace. Remember, he turned it up 9 times. The people that threw them into the fiery furnace, they died themselves. And he asked in verse 23, and these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, fell bound into the fiery furnace. The king was astonished, and he rose up in haste. Didn't we throw 3 men in? Yes, king, we did. There is 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. The appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. Underline that. So there's a 4th person. To King Nebuchadnezzar's untrained eye, he declares that this is like a son of a god. Remember, they believed in lots of gods. And so who was the 4th person in the fire with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that was miraculously allowing them to walk through the fire without being burned? He looked like the son of a god. So the automatic question is this the son of God? Could this be Jesus Christ? Remember, we don't meet Jesus until Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This is 700 years before the birth of Christ. This is a possible location where we see a Christophany, an appearance of Christ or a symbol of Christ before he's actually born in the Gospels. a son of a god. Now, this is the report of a pagan king. So, this is not a declaration that Jesus showed up, but the king Nebuchadnezzar saw what he called the son of a god. Later, they're going to call him an angel. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego never say anything about this fourth person. We never hear an explanation. Daniel doesn't explain it any further other than to give us the opinion of, again, this main character, King Nebuchadnezzar. So it's cool to think that this is possibly Jesus or a picture of Jesus. This could be God himself. Now, God himself appearing is pretty miraculous. People didn't take that lightly. When God shows himself in the Old Testament, it's overwhelming. King Nebuchadnezzar was not overwhelmed. Obviously divine or angelic in nature. And so this fourth character, this fourth person, this fourth God shows up in the story, and they are unharmed. They come out of the fiery furnace. Here's a phrase to underline. Most high God. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God. Now, the reason I'm highlighting Most High God is because this name for God, Most High God, I think it's Elohim in Hebrew, is brought up in the next chapter 3 or 4 more times. This exact title is used, the Most High God. Remember, if I believe in lots of gods, now I'm saying this one is the Most High God. If I'm going to make a statue for myself that you have to worship, all of a sudden I'm admitting maybe there's a God that's over me. That's what Nebuchadnezzar says when he says Most High God. That travels over the bridge. God is still and always will be the Most High God. Come out here. They come out of the fiery furnace. There's nothing on them that's burned. Even their clothes was not harmed. Nebuchadnezzar answers and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." So now he's blessing that God. He has sent an angel, so he calls the character an angel. And the king commanded, therefore he makes a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be torn limb from limb. So now you can't say anything bad about the Hebrew God, and their houses will be destroyed. So just in case you want to think about this, you're going to get torn limb from limb, and your house is going to be destroyed. Those Chaldeans that told on him, this was meant for them. Thus the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon, the biggest, most powerful city of that time, of that world, for several hundred years. King Nebuchadnezzar, the most powerful, most successful king or emperor of Babylon, and he was responsible for expanding it unlike anything else. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon was one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world. Nebuchadnezzar built them for his wife because she missed her mountains. So he created a mountain of a garden in the middle of the city. That's this guy. And so in the midst of this bounty, he has this moment where he encounters the Most High God. So that's Daniel chapter 3. We've traveled through it. Now we're going to workshop through it real quick, and that'll be our time together. Any thoughts or questions or observations about Daniel chapter 3? Remember, in the first step, and that's what we've just done, we've just looked at it and made some observations about the language, the culture, the time, the place, what was happening and what was going on. Now we get to the second section, and we want to start thinking about it. This is where we do Q&A. So if we mark it up, mark it here. Now we ask questions and get answers. So let's just throw out a couple of questions, guys. Just unmute yourself. If you got a question, just throw it out. Even if you know the answer to the question, as you're reading, what would be some questions that come up from this chapter? They can be broad, they can be specific. There's no such thing as a bad question. What are some questions that we might have as we read this together? If you're reading this for yourself or you're trying to do a group Bible study through it, what would be a question that comes up? We're trying to figure out what the truth principles are. So we're investigating the meaning. So we may have questions about background, about the story, about the literature, about the words being used, about the characters, about the setting or the plot, or the meaning. Any questions, any burning questions pop into your mind as examples of good questions to ask? Go ahead, Jared.
I noticed at verse 19, it says that Nebuchadnezzar's facial expression was altered towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. What exactly does that mean?
Where is that in the story? 16,
Verse
17.
19.
What version are you reading?
I'm using NAS.
Okay. And read it for me again.
It says the Nebuchadnezzar was filled with wrath, and his facial expression was altered towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Okay. ESV says Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Something changed in this moment. What changed? What changed?
I mean, his emotion towards them, I suppose.
Uh-huh. What was Jordan?
Just that his attitude, like he gave him a second chance, and it's like, ah, I gave you your second chance. Now you've wasted it. Time to go.
Yeah. So this is storytelling at its finest, right? And you're describing the scene and he's got his arm around Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He's going, guys, listen. I know you probably didn't want to bow down to this. I get it, but let's just do it. And they went, we're not gonna do it. And he went, what? So it's that description of like, and he went from rooting for them to ready to 9 times hotter kill them. So yeah, it was a view into his heart in that moment. Good question. And man, does that connect you in a personal way to that story? Because we've all been there.
I think that the one thing that might have influenced his wrath, his fury, was the fact that this probably was not happening in private. There are probably people who are hearing this discourse, and it embarrassed the king. The king presumed a relationship that wasn't there, that transcended their relationship with God. And that was embarrassing.
Yeah, absolutely at play here. Any other questions? Jordan?
Yeah, I just get a kick out of less a question than a comment of, okay, we're going to throw them in the burning flames and all that. And then even though he then recognizes God as the Most High, his reaction to disobedience and that is still violent. It's still ripping limb from limb. It's still death and punishment. And so I just get it's interesting. And I'm interested to see where this continues to evolve into.
Yeah, and the sneak peek into his heart is he still believes he's the king of the world, and now he's the defender of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's God. Like it's still the world still revolves around King Nebuchadnezzar still, and that's going to be major and come in the next one. Is there one more question that you might have, big or small, Cheryl?
My question is, what would I have done in that situation?
Yeah, so okay. I'm bowing on the outside, but I'm standing on the inside, right? I'm not going to ruffle any feathers. I may think this is true. I may think, but and it's one of those impossible questions, right? What would you do if someone said, hey, worship somebody else you don't believe in? Think about what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego believed and they knew. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego knew and believed the 10 commandments. Commandment number 1, thou shalt worship no other God. You have no other gods before me. Commandment number 2, you should not make any graven images. They believed those 2 commandments. They also had the passage that we looked at in Isaiah that said God's going to protect you. He's going to walk with you through the waters. And when you go through the fires, you won't be burned. They knew these statements about God. And when they got pressed, they chose to believe those statements that God had made and to follow the commands that God had given, no matter what, even if it meant fiery furnace. So huge stuff. Now we're getting to the part where we're going to do some Q&A, we could ask all kinds of questions all the way through. Who's the characters? What's the plot? What does it mean? Where's it go? We want to try to get to some truth. Let me ask one question and we'll dive into it because we did this on Sunday. And if you're watching on YouTube Live, you can look back at Sunday's talk from Branch Life Church and see our lesson, our sermon on this, and you'll see a little bit of what we're talking about here. This is a deeper dive into it, but you can ask yourself, what is worship? We do get a little bit of a theology of worship as we travel through this. The king was asking the people to worship the idol, and they said no. They said no to worship. So let me show you guys. Let me share. Let me make sure I'm getting this on. So in Daniel chapter 3, remember those key verses. We're going to ask the question, what is worship? 16, 17, 18, 19. Let's dive into this a little bit more and ask ourselves, what is worship? If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from, but if not, and if you remember Sunday's talk, this but if not is a big theology point. Very, very, very important 3 words. Let it be known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image you have set up. So let's take these words and try to think about, answer the question, what is worship? So worship, there's an involvement of service to the gods or the thing that you worship. And then he says, or worship, which if we break this out, was the act of bowing down to the golden image. So we're not gonna bow. What happens when you bow down to something? You are submitting yourself to that thing. So when my dog, if I yell at my dog and the dog decides not to submit, it's going to get aggressive and come at me, or the dog's going to take that little kind of puppy eye bow. When we bow, it's submission, and it's also a display of adoration. I'm putting you before myself. I love you more than I love myself. So to answer the question, what is worship? We take this idea of service and of love and of submission. Now we bore this out a little bit on Sunday, so this will just be for those of you that weren't there. So love, service, and submission. We have these things happening in our lives all the time, but when all 3 of them are happening to one thing, that thing that we are loving, submitting to, and serving is the thing that is at the center of our heart. So the intersection of love, service, and submission become the top contenders for worship in my life. So what are you worshiping? What were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego not willing to worship? They weren't going to adore, they weren't going to submit to, and they weren't going to serve the gods of Nebuchadnezzar. They weren't going to allow that to be at the center of their lives. Now, what they did in service to Babylon was normal. And yes, that promoted a culture and a religion that wasn't their own. They served it. It didn't mean that they loved it. There was even some submission there, but they weren't going to have reverence for it or bow down to it. There's lots of things in our life that we love, and it doesn't mean we worship them. I can love a sport. I can love a person. I can love a hobby, but I don't necessarily serve it or submit to it. So when those 3 things combine, that's your top contender for something that you're worshiping. The problem that is being addressed here is anytime you worship something other than God, your heart has been given to an idol. No other gods before me, no graven images. So if I'm allowing something to have the center of my heart other than God, then am I bowing to an idol? And that's this self-evaluation process that we want to go through. So under asking the question, what is worship? Man, it becomes a powerful, powerful thought. And now we're starting to cross the bridge. The truth principle that is true for everyone, everywhere, is worship is a combination, or we'll just say combination, or involves, love, serving, and submission. So worship is that thing that where love, service, and submission intersect. Let me ask the class, what are some top contenders for a normal American alive in our century that this might be where something that we worship? We're in our culture, it's not going to be a giant golden statue, but what are some things that we might worship in place of God that we as a culture, as a people today, might love, submit, and serve to? Maybe we don't even know we're worshiping it. What do you think are some top contenders?
Let me unmute you. Wait a minute.
Sandy, go ahead.
A TV set,
I love it.
movies.
I spend a lot of time with it. I adore it. I submit to it. My schedule is impacted by what's the TV, and I serve it. I pay for it. I make it happen. Yeah. And then technology can become something that we worship. Social media, if you're a teenager, right? Young adult, can be something that you start to takes the center of your throne. Good. Jordan or Martha?
Success, like your career, climbing the ladder, the success ladder.
Yep. Submit to it. Now, can you serve your success in your profession? Absolutely. Can you love it? Absolutely. That, not saying it's worship, but then when I start to follow it, when I start to submit to it, when I start to give myself, now all three of those things combined, it can become a top contender for worship. Cheryl?
Money and health.
Money and health. Remember, money is not the root of all evil, but the love of money. Can I serve for money? Sure. Should I love it? Why not? Because then it starts to become something that you worship. It becomes an idol of your heart. Same thing can happen in fitness. Man, you can submit, you can totally map out your life for your health, or on the other end, guard your health with an overemphasis on it. Either way. Good. Any others burning examples, Jordan?
I say this one carefully, but country.
Yeah. Well, let's pick on another country, not America. Let's say the Spanish. You know, they can have such a regard for their nation that becomes the thing that they serve even above God, right? Above all else, above the love for other humanity, right? So of course, Americans, we have patriotism and we have it oozing from our pores, but it can easily become the thing that we worship over and above God. Yes, we can love our country. Yes, we can serve our country. We do submit to our leaders, but does it become the thing that defines us? So yeah, that's a good example. So we can keep going, and then you can even make this more personal. I think another big one for our day and our culture, parents, your kids, you know, even your spouse, a relationship, the desire for a relationship, if you're single, can be all consuming. Students that are in school, your academics, your sports, all of that stuff all of this can become the thing that we bow down to when we hear the music, right? And we're demanded to do it. But if God would remove that thing and ask you to say, instead, put him in that place, would you be okay with that? And that's exactly what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were being asked. So we learn about worship, and worship worship involves the combination of love, serving, and submitting. That's a truth principle. That definition of worship now can carry over the bridge. And we've talked about what they did with it, with the idol, But what about with us today, our kids, our country, our health? Now we're starting to cross the bridge, and we're starting to see how it matters to us today. So that's a good example of a truth principle. Let me give you one other track here, which is really interesting. So truth principles, when we get to the part where we're saying, what does this mean? Well, we talked about what worship is. So we got there. Who is worthy of worship? So, or God is worthy of worship would be the principle of worship. When is God worthy of worship? When it is going our way? When he does what he wants, we want him to do? Or is he worthy of worship when it's not going our way? So we go back to those three words, but if not. So God is able to save us from your fiery furnace, but if not, we're still going to not worship your God. So the principle is God is worthy of worship no matter what our circumstances are. God is able to save us. This is a truth principle, but may choose not to. So the truth principle is God, who's able to save us, doesn't always save us, but if not. And so now we battle back and forth. You see this happen all the time when someone almost has a car accident. They came home and they said, I got so close to I was this close from having a car accident. And man, God is good. That's true. That's great. That he is good. He saved you from the car accident. But what about the person who had the car accident? They had it. Like it crashed together. Is God still good? He's still good whether you had the accident or you didn't have the accident. He may save you or he may not. We don't control God, but we know that he is able to save us from the trouble or from the fire if he chooses to. Yet he's always worthy of worship no matter our circumstances. That's a truth principle that goes from one place or the other. So this idea of worship, this is the topic that's here in spades. The worthiness of God's worship, the power of God, his ability to save us from the fire, yet he doesn't always do it. And so one principle that really sticks out to me from here is God doesn't promise to save us from the fire, but he does promise to walk with us through it. And so when we go through trouble, God will be with us in that trouble. And in this case, that God literally showed up in the fire, and yes, he saved them from death, but he walked with them through the trouble. Could God have just changed Nebuchadnezzar's mind before the whole fire thing? Yes. But remember, his face changed. Nebuchadnezzar's heart hardened, and they were still punished, and people still died. And God showed up and walked with them through the water. So we take it to this final last step and this final last moment. And this will be the last thing that we work on, and then we'll release you guys here till next week. We want to talk about an application statement. So this is step 3. What do we do with these truths that we've just been exploring and uncovering and thinking about after we've made these observations? Well, we want to teach you today how to make an application statement. Now, an application statement has 4 parts. 1, 2, 3, 4. So a good application statement has 4 parts to it. And we want to encourage you to actually practice writing application statements this week. Think of application statements as short, specific homework assignments. That's probably the best way to think about it. You actually give yourself a homework assignment that ties directly to the truths that you just uncovered. So I take the homework assignment or I take the truth and I now say, okay, what about me today in my time, in my place, in my heart, in my thinking, and my action? So here's what a good application statement has. Number 1, it has time. It has time. In other words, you're going to give yourself a time window, a period of time where this is actually going to happen. It may be a one-time event, but it may be an ongoing event, but there's time in there. It's not just My application is to worship God. There's no time there. When are you going to worship God? So you get more specific when you give it time. Number two, it has a person. Usually the person is you. So it's something that I am going to do. So worship God more, to add person to that, I will worship God. So at least I've given it person. So there's something that involves me. It's not just a fact or a piece of information. It's personal. It has action. It has action. So there's going to be some action verb there's something going to take place or not take place. Is maybe erasing something. It may be adding something, but there's action to it. It's action oriented, like we like to say. And number 4, this is the hardest one. It's measurable. It's measurable. When I've completed my homework assignment, I can look back and give myself a grade. I can measure whether or not I accomplished it. Did I do good? Did I do okay? Did I do poorly at it? I can look back and measure what happens when I have a good application statement. So again, worship God, that's great, but that's really vague. It's not very specific. There's not time to it. There's the act of worship, but the more specific I get in explaining how and when and where I'm going to worship God, what does that look like for me today in my life? Well, that gets better. Let me just give you an example. I'm going to dedicate myself to letting God be on the throne of my heart by every Sunday at 10 o'clock during the COVID pandemic, gather with my family to worship with my church online. That's a very, very specific assignment about worship. And again, it's kind of a given. If I'm a Christian, I'm following God, I'm going to do church, but it's not that given right now during the pandemic. Like, that's a really important thing. Just think about it for yourself. How easy or hard has it been for you to stop and worship God during a pandemic because you have to do it through a computer? And is it something you're doing with your family? Are you standing together with those you love, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, so that you're worshiping the one and only God? Is that a priority for you? Or are your Sundays getting away from you? I mean, it's so weird right now that I sometimes forget that it's Sunday, but that's the day I'm going to worship God. So I can take an application statement about worship and apply it to the renewing of my heart and my mind with my church, my brothers and sisters, in gathering even virtually. Now that statement is something I can measure. Did I or didn't I show up at 10 o'clock? Was my family with me, or were we distracted? Did we focus? Did we grow, or were we easily distracted? Was I posting on Facebook at the same time as worshiping with, so there's that kind of stuff going on. It was an action that I took place. I was the person, or my family were the people involved, and there's a specific time to do it, 10 o'clock on Sundays. Now, that was low hanging fruit for application. But you can do that. So that assignment to attend worship weekly is a super important assignment that I can give myself as an action statement. So I want you to take a crack at this. And the best way we can do it is just to try to do it. I found teaching application statements over the last 15 years that this is one of the harder steps. And the application statement is not holy. It's not even always necessary, but getting your in the habit of saying, I'm going to do what the word of God says to do and actually give my assignment is super important. So think about James chapter 1, verses 19 through 25. It says, don't just be hearers of the word, but be doers also. And so I take what I heard and now I think about what do I do with this? So give yourself a homework assignment. Take 30 seconds right now to just write yourself an assignment based on something from Daniel chapter 3, from the topics that were here. It could be a topic we discussed like worship. It could be it could be about service. It could be about love. All of those things come up here. It could be about authority. It could be about faith in God. It could be about good times versus bad times, suffering versus victory. Remember, but if not, all kinds of different things that can come up. There's one truth. There's one thing that's true. What's true is true, and that's not changing in Daniel chapter 3. The truth principles are always the same. The application of those principles are endless, and they're unique to you because you are unique in God's time and in God's plan and in God's place. You're unique. And so the way you apply these truths are going to be unique from anyone else. And you're the only one that can put these truths into action in your life. So I'm just kind of babbling on as I give you guys some time to actually write down an application statement from here. And then if those of you that are in the Zoom class, if you'd be willing to let us workshop your statement, and I'm going to compare it back to those three standards here. Does it have time? Does it have person? Is it actionable? And again, the more specific, the better. And you don't want your application statements to be huge, long paragraphs. 1, 2, 3 sentences at the most usually is a typical application statement. Not to say they can't be longer, but specific and succinct, and having those parts to it. Those would be good application statements. When you write these too, and give you some more advice, and hopefully you guys are writing as I'm yakking. Listen to the Holy Spirit. Listen to the Spirit of God guide you. Lord, what do you show me? What do you want to reveal to me? What do I need to do with this? It's very possible that you could read chapter 3 and you could realize that you are bowing down to an idol. And you're like, you know what? I am loving, serving, and submitting something other than God. And this thing keeps creeping in. And maybe you have to say to yourself, all right, my action statement is less of this and more of God. And whatever that means, or whatever that looks like. Or your application statement is in the next 10 hours, I'm gonna set aside some time to get on my knees before God and just confess my idol worship to him. And give him that thing, whatever that thing may be, and have a moment of confession before God where you just apologize and ask forgiveness. That would be a powerful, powerful step that you're able to take this. Sometimes the application statements are big. Sometimes they're just tiny, tiny moments. Sometimes they're life-changing in scope and form, but in every case, they're transforming. So that's good. More or less and what does God do with these truths in your lives? So I've yacked quite a bit as I've been giving you time. Is anyone willing to share their 30-second attempt at an application statement? And then we'll use it to help us learn how to do these a little bit more. Anybody willing to share theirs live with us on Zoom? If you are watching on YouTube and you want to text yours in to me, feel free. Or if you want to put it in the comments as well. I know I've been getting several texts from our YouTube watchers that are live. If it's the rebroadcast, just practice yourself with yourself wherever you're at. Anybody want to give us a shot at an application statement? Go ahead, Jared.
All right. This week I am going to be bold about standing up for my friends when they're made fun of at work.
Say that this week I'm going to be bold.
This week I'm going to be bold about my faith and standing up for my Christian friends at work when they're made fun of.
All right. Is there person there? Is there person? Yeah. So Jared's in it. So are his friends. Is there action? So he's going to be bold. That's the action. And he's going to get specific and stand up for Christian friends that get put down or made fun of at work. So we now have a very specific place where this is going to happen. So there's time, there's action, there's person. So it's happening this week time. And is it measurable? So that's he can look back on the week. If we would come back and say, Jared, how'd it go? And he could say, you know what, this happened and this is how I stood up, or this is when I was silent. And, I'm going to stand for my faith even. And you can see the direct connection to chapter 3 because everybody else was doing one thing, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood up. They stood up and they did another thing. And hopefully in your boldness, you're still holding some gentleness and respect for those that may disagree. We never saw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego flip their lids. They just had a quiet confidence in God. And so when we stand for our faith, we're able to do that because of the confidence that we have in our God who's there. So yeah, we keep our testimonies, but also stand for our faith. That's a good one. Very, very good. A+. Any other application statements?
Mine is similar to Jared's in that I said, when I face a choice to stand for Christ at work, I should regard anything that others above me try to have me love, serve, and submit to, and speak carefully to them with compassion.
Good. Everything's there. There's time, there's person, and there's action. My guess is, and this is probably because we're on video, there is a specific situation that you're probably thinking of. There's a specific scenario that you're probably, so right now it's a general statement when those above me say blah, blah, blah. You probably have been asked or are being asked to do something that you're wrestling with. You can make your application statement specific even to that situation now. And don't name it here on camera, but name it in your own prayer life to God, and ask him to show you the proper response as you yes, serve and submit because you're supposed to during your job, but not allowing something to take the place of worship. Yeah. Good. Any others? All right. Excellent, guys. So that's our travel through chapter 3. Let me just wet your whistle for chapter 4. So Nebuchadnezzar, he's going to tear people limb from limb if they speak against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's God. And then in chapter 4, he forgets, and his circle comes full arc. Let me give you a bonus thought. How easy is it for us to forget God, forget what God has already done and already shown us? How quickly do we forget? And Nebuchadnezzar is no exception to that. So God's been trying to show him, Nebuchadnezzar himself. I have a sneaky suspicion that at the end of his story, King Nebuchadnezzar becomes a brother in Christ. And he's someone that we'll probably get to meet in heaven, but his spiritual journey is a rocky one, man. And like a lot of our spiritual journeys can be very, very rocky. So hopefully Daniel chapter 3 has come to life for you afresh, or in a new way, or for the first time, you've been able to see, hey, this is what happens when I dive into the Bible and I look at it, I think about it, and I do it. Thank you guys who are on Zoom with us, allowing people to be an example of those that are taking the class, and for all of you that have joined us on live. If you have any questions or comments, you can always put those there. We can jump back and answer those even during the rebroadcast of this if you're watching it at a different time other than live with us on Wednesday. We want to invite you guys to be a part of Branch Life Church on Sundays. We live host at 10 a.m. during the pandemic, and we're looking for the future. So we're going to be jumping ahead into Daniel chapter 4 this Sunday, and we'd love for you to be there, Facebook, YouTube, or at branchlife.church. Again, if you'd like to be connected with us directly, you can travel to branchlife.church, go to the Daniel card, and fill out your information there. We'd be glad to add you to the email list and get the information for this class each and every week. So next week, we're going to be in Daniel chapter 4. So that's your homework. Read Daniel chapter 4, and I want you guys to work on not only having a question from Daniel chapter 4, but make sure if you didn't do it during the class that you have written at least one example of an application statement. Remember, you could literally write thousands of application statements, but you're answering the question, how does this truth from God's word impact me today? And what does this do to transform and change me? And every time you read God's word, it comes alive and it changes you. So guys, thank you for joining us tonight, and we're going to end our YouTube time together